Good evening and welcome to Committee of the Whole for Monday, March 21st. I'm Councillor Wainwright chairing tonight. We have the full council here and we've got about 20 members of the public in the audience for the first time in a very long time. So I'd like to call the meeting to order, and I'll like to acknowledge that we're holding this meeting in the traditional territory of the Wasanich people who've been stewards of this of their territory for time immemorial. Committee, you have the agenda in front of you. We have a couple of dozen pages of additional written submissions for item 7A2. Are there any other additions or corrections? And if not, would someone like to move adoption as amended?
Move adoption as amended.
Second.
Okay, that's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We'll move on then to public participation period. And there is a public participation period after the development application for the Pooch Parlour. This is a general public participation period if anyone would like to speak, ask questions, whatever. And if you do, just come up to the microphone. Okay, please. And if you could press the button on the microphone so the red light comes on, and give us your name and address, please. It's, yeah, that button at the base.
You've got a special slot on the agenda.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
he'll call on you to
Okay.
present, Kathy.
So it's anyone else?
No problem. Sorry, I didn't recognize you. Okay. So we'll move on then. Seeing that we don't have anyone for the general public participation, move on to approval of the minutes. And we have the minutes from Committee of the Whole for March 7th, 2022.
Second.
That's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, now we'll move on to development applications, and this is official community plan amendment, application number OP 100037, zoning amendment application number RZ 100106. This is for Pooch Parlour, 101-2031 Malaview Avenue, and this is to amend the zoning and OCP designations to allow for commercial use in an industrial zone. So we've got a presentation by Kathy Banks, and if you could just use the microphone, please. Thank you.
Thank you for considering my application for a bylaw amendment to allow pet grooming at 2031 Malaview Avenue. As I stated in my letter, which I submitted earlier, I've been serving the residents of Sydney for 8 years, and this is my third location. The first location on 4th Street was torn down for development. The second location on 5th Street, I was faced with 50% increase in rent in order to renew the lease. There's just no affordable spaces in the commercial zone for a small business like mine to move to. I would have loved to have stayed within the town core, as many of my customers could walk to me, but again, this was our only option and there was nowhere else for me to move. We found a space when we were looking previously on Bevan, but they didn't want dog grooming operating there. There are office spaces on the second floor of a building on 2nd Street, which would not work for grooming at all. My customers would have a very difficult time getting their dogs up to a 2nd floor space, and guaranteed there would be accidents in hallways, which I'm sure other occupants would not be tolerant of. It can be very loud and very messy, and therefore very difficult for us to find the right fit of space for us to operate in and not disrupt other businesses. We were given the opportunity at 2031 Malaview to sublease the front room of about 400 square feet for my business from the overall 1,100 square feet space, while the warehouse continues to be used for industrial use. When I applied to renew my business license for this year with a change of address, I didn't think it wouldn't be allowed in this location, as there is already a grooming salon with a business license for pet grooming right behind me. I would like to stress that I did not make the move to Malaview knowing that grooming wasn't allowed and trying to sneak into that space for less rent. Dog groomers in Sydney, the Peninsula, and Victoria Island as a whole are very scarce, and most are not accepting new clients. If our service is taken away from Sydney, there will be many, many residents who will have a very hard time to find this quality of care for their pet. Please allow us to stay in operation as a very much needed service to residents of Sydney and the Gulf Islands, and also as an income for myself and 2 employees. Thank you for listening and also considering the facts in my letter that I previously submitted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from committee? Look around. Go ahead.
Thank you. So how long, well, thanks for your letter.
Thank you.
How long have you been operating business in Sydney?
In Sydney, total of going on 8 years in June.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I understand that when you staff advised you in January that you couldn't operate at that location. So you opened anyways without a permit?
Yeah, we were already open, and I got an email because I had applied for the renewal of the business license, and the email came through, so we corresponded back and forth with Corey. My understanding was he knew we were open, so yeah, no one actually told me to close.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you didn't get the regular sort of safety and fire inspection that you would normally have?
There was a fire inspector came by, I can't even remember when. That's what I did the last 2 places. Even when I moved to 5th Street from 4th Street, I put my renewal for the business the business license through, and then they would show up after that with the inspectors.
Okay, so you
Yeah.
knew, you kind of had an idea of what the process
Yeah.
was?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Follett and Councillor Garnet.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. How long is your lease? You say you're a subtenant? Mm-hmm. How long is your lease for now?
We're just there. We just have a year lease with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Had you previously, when you'd moved, did you think about, or when you moved to this one, did you think about, because it was outside of the downtown core, that you should maybe ask the town about the zoning?
I should have, now that I think of it, but there's a dog groomer right behind me with a dog grooming license, so I just didn't even think that it would not be allowed.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And the Sydney Animal Hospital, which I know is North Saanich, but I figured, yeah,
Okay, thank you.
thanks.
Councillor Garnet.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your letter and for making a presentation. Just out of curiosity, when you spoke of 9804 5th Street, where you were before, and the increase in rent,
Yeah.
did the property owner give you some kind of rationale for the large jump in the rent?
No,
Just, that's what it is?
that's what it would be to renew the lease, yeah.
Okay, thank
My
you.
lease for 5 years was up in February, and that's what it would be.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Rentu.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
I get this has to be a real challenge for you, and so I sympathize with the spot that you're in. It's a sublet, 400 square feet, so it's not a lot of space. I think in response to Councillor Keith's question as well, in part, obviously that premises had been fire inspected and visited, in that you've got a landlord behind you you're subleasing from, so it's been inspected in that sense and been viewed. You said you've got a year lease. Is it your intent or your hope to extend as long as there's some resolution here through this process?
Yeah.
Okay, so the location you think
It's
will work
working
for
out.
you?
Like I said, I didn't even really want to move over there,
Yeah.
but now that we're there, it's way better. The parking for my customers is way, way better. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would like to stay there for,
Okay, super.
long term. Yep.
Thank you for that.
Okay, any other questions for Ms. Banks? Okay, thank you for your presentation then. We're going to continue from here. We've also got public participation on this application, And we have a staff report, and I'm not sure if staff want to present any elements of that. Yes, okay. So we'll move on to public participation. If there are members of the audience who would like to speak or make any comments about the application, I will say that we have a couple of dozen, at least, submissions that are all in favor. I don't recall reading anything that was negative. Is there anyone here that wants to add anything, or shall we just, okay?
I'd like to speak, yep.
Please approach the microphone, and if you could give us your name and address.
Yep. There we go. My name is Ted Banks, and my address is 9975 5th Street in Sydney, Unit 204. And I'm Kathy's father and her bookkeeper. I had a prepared speech just to kind of go over the situation, and there's only a couple of elements of that I think that I could add to what Kathy's already said. I think the reason that we're here today is quite clearly a mistake that was made by Kathy and Jim when they were exiting the location on 5th Street over the Christmas holidays and had looked previously for properties across Sydney and not finding anything suitable. They moved pretty quickly, made some assumptions, but definitely did not check the zoning bylaws. Also, very clearly, it was an honest mistake. They didn't try to deceive the town in any way. In fact, when she got the email back when she applied for her business license, it was such a shock to her and Jim after getting the new place up and running that it took her about a week and a half or 2 weeks to even tell me about it, because they were just totally in shock over that first period. One thing I would clarify as well is that when she was leaving the 9804 5th Street location, the rent increase that was proposed was actually 52%. And she would have had to sign up to a 3-year renewal and then hope that she could negotiate a better rate with the landlord after that signing was done. So she was in a very difficult position, decided that she couldn't afford to renew at 9804, and then moved quickly to look for other properties. Once they found the sublease over on Malaview West, then they just made the assumption based on what they saw in the area. I think that, you know, in this case, we're hoping that you will consider her application for the amendment of that property to allow pet grooming in the location. And if that is not possible, at the very least, we're hoping that you would allow her to operate for another year in that location until she can find something that is in the correct zone. And even with that, I don't think there's a guarantee that she's going to find something on this side of the highway that is appropriate for pet grooming on the first floor, and that's a real risk. I think if those can't be accommodated, there's a real risk that that business will have to be simply shut down permanently. And that's all I had to add.
Okay, thank
Yep.
you.
All right?
I saw somebody else in the back who wanted to speak. Please come up to the microphone and give us your name and address.
Push the button.
You just turned it off.
Okay, sorry. Hi, I'm Cindy Head. I'm at 2037 Odland Place here in Sydney. So I've lived here for 24 years with my family, raised my kids here, and have a wonderful little doggie named Mandy for the last 6.5 years. My first doggie I've ever had in my life. And my husband is also here. He delivers the Peninsula News Review, and he delivered to the Pooch Parlour when they were over on, what was the first? 4th Street. And so when we got our little doggie, I went in there, and she graciously accepted my little doggie to do her grooming. And she's very small. She's only like 8 pounds, but she absolutely adores and loves Kathy. Kathy's a small business owner. Obviously has made a little mistake here, and she's in a lovely location now. Parking is great. It's a lot better than next to Fish on Fifth. It's just, that's a popular area, and there's just more parking, and my doggy loves it there. I don't know what I'm gonna do if something does not, if there is some resolution for Kathy and her wonderful staff. My doggy's never been anywhere else, and I'm sure there's lots of doggies that have never been anywhere else besides with Kathy. Anyways, I just thought I'd say that, because my little doggy is the world to me, being my first doggy ever, so I'm not very good at speaking, so. But I do hope there is a resolution of some kind for Kathy and her small business. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Was there anyone else who had something additional that you'd like to add? Could you press the button to turn the red light has to come on. That's it.
Good evening. My name's Megan Pace. I live at 2430 Henry Avenue, Unit 1. I've been a customer of Kathy's ever since she's been in Sydney. I've had 2 dogs there. My first one passed away. I have a second that's there now. I'm one of the seniors that is a customer of hers. Sorry, I'm sort of emotional about this. Kathy is a great business lady. She's a young girl, employs 2 other people. The dogs all love her. There's lots of us in Sydney that come to her. I think she has over 400 clients. People come from the islands to see her. There is nowhere else for us to take our dogs to get groomed. They're all full. And she did make what I consider an honest mistake. There is another groomer there, and I thought the same thing because Janet has a grooming spot over in the feed barn there. I wouldn't have even thought, but I know what assuming does to us all. It's put Kathy where she is at the moment. I hope you reconsider or make a slight allowance that would allow her to stay in this small space. The rents in Sydney are going up. The quaintness, in my opinion, is going away a bit. A lot of our little businesses are leaving. Kathy's next door neighbor, Raining Cats and Dogs, was put out of business for the same kind of $2,000 a month increase. They can't afford it, the little businesses. They're doing their best. And Kathy was just fortunate to find this little spot. So I hope you consider. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So is there anyone else who has something new to add? Okay, lady in the back, please. And if you push the button to, thank you.
Thank you. Am I on?
Yes.
So I don't know if it's anything new to add, but it's to add on to what lovely Miss Pace said and what Miss Banks said. My name's Kim Coe. I live also on Henry Avenue, 2325, unit number 4. And I'd like to actually speak on behalf of groomers as well. I too am a small business owner. I am a dog groomer. I take care of dogs. They come under my care. We don't do this work because it's easy. It's hard on the body. It's not because we love getting nervously pooped on, I should say, some days. Clawed up the arms when chihuahuas want to claw your body and climb to your face. We do it because we love it. And I know Miss Banks, sorry, I'm getting emotional now too. I know Miss Banks and her staff also do it because they genuinely love their career choice. It's a hard career. She loves it. Small business owners, Megan hit it, I believe, the nail right on the head when she said that Sydney is becoming less quaint, and in my opinion, it's becoming less affordable every day. So to be able to find somewhere that allows you to come into a space, stay in that space, and the rent is affordable, you've lucked out. And the fact that she has great parking, a fabulous clientele that would be lost without her. And I can also say that there would definitely be strain on the very few dog groomers that are left in Sydney if she was put out of business. It's already started to happen to me. Not even 2 weeks in, and it's phone calls, it's emails, it's texting, it's people asking, are you taking new clients? Can you take new clients? By the dozens. And I can't accommodate any more new clients where I'm at my max. And I'm sure Janet at the feed barn feels the same way. So for you to come and consider giving her her business license would be phenomenal. And it's much needed in Sydney, in my personal opinion, that the residents, most residents in this beautiful little town do have a dog and are much in need of the services. And it's not just grooming, it's things that are needed like nails, ears, glands, stuff that can actually be detrimental to the pet's health if it's not done correctly. And vets aren't taking anymore either. I had my veterinarian actually ask me if I was willing to take on their nail trimming clients, which I can't accommodate anymore. So just to sort of give a perspective of what other dog groomers in Sydney feel, it's just me personally, but that's all I'd like to add. So thank you for listening to me.
Okay, thank you. So we're pretty much at the end of our public participation. Does anyone else have something new to add? Lady in the back?
I have written a letter. My name's Dina Anderson. I live 1910 Swartz Bay Road, North Saanich. The only thing that I think hasn't been covered tonight is that I've lived in this area for 20 years, and I can really see that it's growing. Sydney in particular has got all sorts of condos springing up, which is a controversial subject, but they're definitely here. And I believe that that form of accommodation is the sort of place where people that have little small fluffy dogs that need regular grooming are going to live. So I think that there's going to be more and more dogs coming to the area, and I think to be one groomer down would be a very sad state of affairs for all the other dogs too. And that's it.
Okay, thank you. So I'll close the public participation period, and we'll move on. So we have a report from staff. Did staff want to present any of that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just make a few comments. I guess first of all, I'd just like to stress that this is never a situation that staff, when we deal with business licensing, want to find ourselves in. We do want businesses to come to Sydney, and we want businesses to succeed in Sydney. And so this situation is not actually about, from staff's perspective, it's not actually about Pooch Parlour, the business. It's more about the town's industrial area and keeping the town's industrial area strong and what it was intended for, which is to accommodate industrial businesses. So I won't cover the background of my staff report very much, just because the circumstances that brought us here are pretty clearly outlined in there, and Mrs. Banks has touched on them as well. I just wanted to touch on a few of the reasons why staff are recommending denial of these two amendments in this case. Generally speaking, over the long term, and that is what we are tasked with viewing in this case, is the long-term viability of the town's industrial area. We feel that over the long term, approving this application would weaken the industrial area as a place for industrial business. Some of the reasons for that are that first, the economics of industrial businesses and commercial businesses are different. In speaking with several firms who lease industrial and commercial land, I understand that industrial lease rates are about 30% less than commercial lease rates. One of the reasons for this is that industrial businesses have much more in terms of space needs and are not able to pay the same amount per square foot as commercial businesses are. They have bigger machines, they have more storage space requirements, and that's partly reflected in the lease rates. Generally, industrial spaces are larger, and the cost per square foot is less. Introducing commercial businesses into that mix, staff believe will over time potentially raise the lease rates as landlords adjust their leasing to meet the new businesses that are now potentially introduced into the industrial area. Allowing commercial businesses in the industrial area, for whatever reason, we believe will also encourage other businesses, similar businesses, commercial businesses, to attempt to relocate to the industrial area. Several of the letters, and I believe a comment tonight, mentioned that there was a dog groomer around the corner, and I'm sure I'll be asked for the reasons why that dog groomer is around the corner, but you can see what happens is that people see that and assume that it's just fine. And you know, potentially if an application like this were to be approved, the next time around you'd have 2 dog groomers, and the third dog groomer would think, perfect. And that would add to sort of the, you know, okay, now there's more and more industrial or commercial businesses looking for that industrial land, potentially leading to the lease rates rising. It's a very accepted fact across the municipal planning world that once industrial land is lost to other uses, particularly higher value uses, it is almost impossible to get back. Uses like commercial, as I mentioned, have higher lease rates, residential as well, generally more valued on a per square foot basis than industrial land. And the economics of industrial land make it so that you can't buy that land back or lease that land back once it's gone to those higher lease rates. And as well, this is a bit of an invisible effect, but commercial businesses in the industrial area, by occupying that space alone, are taking opportunities away from other potential industrial businesses. You know, it was mentioned that this is 400 square feet of space, if I got that right. But you know, that's potentially space that a small tech startup could occupy at a lower cost than locating in the commercial area where it may not be viable for them. So some of these effects are not even really visible. They're just businesses that go elsewhere because that space is no longer available. For all these reasons, the current official community plan has several objectives and policies that recommend against commercial uses in the industrial area. It opens the door a crack to some limited commercial uses that do support industrial uses. As you know, there's a few restaurants over there and a fitness center, for example. The reason that those are permitted in the industrial land is primarily to provide services for the workers in the industrial areas, but they are very limited in scope, and the intent is solely to support industrial businesses rather than just allow commercial uses generally. Because of these policies, we are carrying those forward into the draft OCP as well. There are very similar policies being brought forward in the draft. Staff's general opinion of this situation is that while there may be an affordability issue in the commercial area, that won't be solved by permitting commercial businesses in the industrial area. Staff are concerned that it will simply overflow that issue into the commercial area, and issues will arise in both as a result. So I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Okay, so questions from committee? Go ahead, Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So in regard to the grooming parlor that's operating behind Feed Barn, I think it'd be useful for the public to maybe have an understanding of why that can operate. So if staff could
Sure.
Comment on that.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe. So the Local Government Act, which is a provincial act that regulates municipal zoning practices, has a section that protects what's called non-conforming uses, colloquially referred to as grandfathering. So where a use has existed prior to a municipal zoning bylaw, once that bylaw is adopted, even if that use is not permitted in the bylaw, the use may continue despite the bylaw, provided that that use doesn't stop for 6 months or more. So it's basically termed, it's called being grandfathered or legally non-conforming. It existed prior to the bylaw, and until that business is rolled up or stops for 6 months or more, it may continue. So that's the case with the grooming business that's in the location where the feed barn is. It's got legally non-conforming status, and until it stops, it can continue despite what our zoning bylaw says.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, are there any other questions for staff? Councillor Fallon?
Thank you. Through you to staff. Mr. Corey, you said in your discussion that there are a limited number of commercial businesses allowed in industrial that complement, my word, not yours, the industrial. What is stopping an increasing number of permitted commercial businesses to open up in industrial, so that, you know, that they are no longer supporting the industrial, but they overwhelm the industrial? What is there some way that we control that?
Yes, so the zoning bylaw has different zones for different types of uses. For example, the C1 downtown commercial zone has the broadest range of permitted uses. There's a table in the bylaw that says exactly what uses are permitted in that zone. Likewise, the M1 industrial zone, which covers the west side industrial area, also has a table of permitted uses. And apart from a few that are mentioned in the staff report that are commercial uses, the rest are industrial or light industrial uses. So it's what is listed in the zoning bylaw as permitted.
So I don't think that I've got, so, but what is to stop permitted commercial businesses, businesses that are permitted in industrial from overwhelming, so that it skews the percentage? So let's say, for sake of argument, right now the restaurants, the fitness center, the feed barn make up, let's just say 5% of light industrial. What is to stop that from being 75%?
Yeah, sorry, I misunderstood your question. Essentially the market. Conceivably, every single property could, in the industrial west side, could be a restaurant. I think there's a certain number of people who are going out to eat who work in the industrial west side every day. The number of restaurants in the industrial west side reflects that number of people who are going out to eat. They may draw customers from other areas as well. But the answer to your question is there is no limit to those few those few commercial businesses that are allowed to operate in the industrial area.
So in this case, it would be market-driven, not
That's correct.
zoning governance?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Councillor Rentoul and then Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions, if I may. First off, because I anticipate it may come up in discussion later, Mr. Newcomb, could you speak to temporary use permit and its relationship perhaps as a solution to this scenario?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Rintoul. So the Local Government Act also allows for something called a temporary use permit, where it says where permitted by an official community plan or by zoning bylaw, a council may by resolution issue what's called a temporary use permit. Those can be issued for up to 3 years and renewed once for an additional up to 3 years. And despite the zoning, they can authorize a use that is not included as a permitted use in the zoning bylaw. However, they must be authorized by the official community plan. So in our case, Sydney's case, we do authorize temporary uses in the official community plan in the industrial area. but we only authorize industrial temporary uses in the industrial area. It doesn't authorize commercial uses in the industrial area under a temporary use permit. Makes it clear?
Indirect follow-up to that before my next question then. In your introduction statement, you said for 3 years, provided it's eligible within the OCP or by zoning amendment. So are we referring to only one of the two may well be required to issue a temporary use permit?
So in Sydney's case, the most efficient approach to go the temporary use permit route would be to amend the official community plan, because it currently doesn't permit a commercial temporary use permit in the industrial area. We could amend both bylaws, the OCP and zoning bylaw, to allow it. Not necessary in the case where the official community plan, if the official community plan doesn't authorize a commercial temporary use permit in the industrial area, that bylaw must be amended. If it authorized both, then we could do it through just a zoning bylaw amendment. In this case, though, we need an official community plan amendment.
Okay, my head's spinning a little bit, so I can understand some confusion on the part of others.
To summarize, the town's current regulatory approach is that in order to issue a temporary use permit, we first need an official community plan bylaw amendment, followed by a council resolution and the appropriate notice to issue a temporary use permit.
Okay, thank you. And my final question, if I may, Mr. Chair, the suggestion was made, part of the rationale, the concern with respect to this is, potentially a flood of commercial uses coming into the area. We have heard, and I think we can see that it's indeed the case, that this particular profession is in high demand locally. And it's an unfair question to you. I won't point blank ask how many other business licenses are there for pet grooming in Sydney, but if you know the answer, that would be great. My assumption is, however, that I wouldn't be worried about a flood of groomers wanting to come into West Sydney, I guess is where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't speculate how many groomers are waiting in the wings, but to my knowledge, we have the feed barn location groomer, and then there is another groomer who operates individually as a home occupation. That's all to my knowledge, yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
So I've got Councillor Garnett, then Mayor McNeil-Smith, then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff. Following up on Councillor Fallett's discussion point, if the West Side Local Area Plan, which is hoped to be adopted into the current OCP, plays out the way it's planned, couldn't it possibly be that the market would drive that we would have a lot more commercial uses in that area, given that the population is likely to 10 times what's there now? That's just a potential, long-term looking at things.
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you. So the intent of the West Side Local Area Plan is to support both that residential neighborhood as well as the industrial area with additional commercial uses located in the mixed-use village. So the intent is to strengthen the industrial area by taking those supportive commercial uses like restaurants or fitness center and moving them over to the mixed-use village. If that happens over time, I could see a scenario where the industrial zoning is made, I guess, even more pure, if you want to put it that way, in that it would only allow industrial uses, and you would have those commercial uses like restaurants or other businesses, potentially like dog grooming, in the mixed-use village that you're referring to.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. And questions through you to staff, expanding on the questions around temporary use permits. You indicated that the official community plan should make reference to temporary use permits if that's part of the planning, and you indicated that with regards to the industrial zone, you might approve temporary use permits for other industrial uses. Could you give a possible example why, if it's zoned industrial, why you would want to have a temporary use permit for industrial within that zone, identified zone?
Sure. For example, I would classify Sydney's industrial area as a light industrial area. We don't allow some heavy industrial uses that could have deleterious impacts on adjacent properties. Metal smelting, for an example, something like that you know, would really, in terms of noxious fumes or something like that, might be difficult to accommodate in the area. That's just an example. But in that case, you know, say a metal smelting business came to town and said, you know, we've got this plan to set up, and it's to service this other industrial use on a temporary basis. Council could consider, you know, their plan to mitigate those issues and approve a temporary use in the industrial area for a period of up to 3 years with a potential 3-year extension.
Thank you. And my next question along the same lines is, it doesn't seem that there would be a reason when drafting an OCP or doing an OCP review, as we are doing as a community at the moment, putting in a temporary use permit for commercial uses that aren't identified within the identified use. So you've indicated Sydney doesn't. Would you be able to comment that in general municipalities wouldn't be looking to put temporary use permits in their official community plan for other commercial uses in an industrial area?
Generally, I would say that the temporary use permit system is used for commercial in commercial areas. That essentially a municipality may want to test out before adopting into their zoning bylaw. A good example of this is cannabis retail. Central Saanich has used a temporary use permit system to consider cannabis retail in some of their commercial areas. And likewise, I think most OCPs contemplate industrial temporary uses in industrial areas. This isn't an area I've delved into in a great deal of detail, but I don't know of any examples where you've got a commercial temporary use permit system for an industrial area.
So if that was something that committee this evening was looking to pursue further, what would it look like in our OCP to amend the OCP with a temporary use permit? Would it be temporary use permits for that entire personal service establishment section that you've referred to in your report? We wouldn't be doing it for an individual business.
It wouldn't be structured as sort of an individual use. I mean, it could be if council so directed. Generally, though, it would be an amendment essentially adding the words "and commercial temporary use permits" to the section that already contemplates industrial temporary use permits.
Okay, but if we did that, then that would open the door to literally any type of commercial business, for example, in the downtown.
Yep.
Any type of service or retail.
Yep.
To request a
Yep.
temporary use permit.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Duncan is a first-time speaker, so I'll go to you before Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, I guess through the chair to staff. So when we came up, or the individual listing of the type of businesses that are in the OCP bylaw, you know, and dog grooming is specifically listed under, you know, personal care establishment. It's in here somewhere. I haven't looked at, find it again. But did Sydney determine how that would be broken out, or is this a standard, something standard from the community charter about what kind of uses can be shunted into industrial and what kind are in commercial, and how much leeway do individual municipalities have in how they sort that out? And what I'm thinking of here is I used to work in an office building that's on the industrial side, which was not supporting an industrial use. It was strictly, I mean, it supports them, but not there, an office building. And so I'm wondering how that is decided to allow certain uses in there?
Another great question. I would say some uses definitely have a toe in both worlds, office being a good example of that. Generally, there's sort of a type of office use that is in the industrial area that is over there specifically because they service industrial clients or something like that. So there is certainly some uses that you could classify as both. Struggling to think of an example right now, but there are some limitations, I believe, on what type of office can be located in either area. And then there's, for example, personal service establishment that are clearly in one camp or another. Personal service establishment also includes things like hairdressers, laundry services, things like that are very clearly commercial in nature. So absolutely, there's a level of a gray area, I guess, for some businesses, and in that case, this problem wouldn't exist.
Follow up if I may. So if the list of the types of businesses, like a personal care establishment that is a hairdresser or a gym, does seem like it could support the workers in that area. I could kind of make the case that so could a dog groomer, especially if they lived on that side. Is that an individual use that a municipality would have the leeway to add individually, or is this something that's kind of dictated by a standard in the community charter for all municipalities?
Well, there's, I think, two parts to this answer. The first is that I should be more specific when I say support the workers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, anything over there could support the workers in the course of their personal lives.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, on the way home, they could stop and pick up their dog from dog grooming. When I say support the workers, what I mean is support the workers in the course of their 9 to 5 work life. So, at lunch break, people go out for lunch with a friend or something like that, and they pop out from their workplace. They might go work out at lunch in a fitness center. It's supporting workers while they're at work is, I think, the idea behind that. Does council have the discretion to break out dog grooming as a use that they would like individually and separately in the industrial area? Yes, they do.
Okay. One more follow-up, if I may, because I know Councillor Rintoul already asked this and then said it made his head spin, and so I don't feel quite as stupid re-asking it again. So it sounds like if we amended the OCP to allow a particular use, in industrial, the zoning amendment would not be required, and then a temporary use permit could in fact be allowed for that specific use in that area without having to actually rezone the property in perpetuity?
That's correct.
Thank you.
I would add, though, in my experience dealing with businesses in the town, where there has been a thin edge of the wedge situation, where a business that hasn't quite belonged has come to the town and said, we're going to do this. For example, the Beacon Avenue situation is a great example where it's intended to be a retail situation. In the past, there have been businesses who represented themselves as retail or in some sort of temporary circumstance have located on Beacon Avenue. Those temporary situations very quickly turn permanent. And it's once established, a business is very, very difficult to move. Their clients know where they are, they know where they're located, they're comfortable in that space. Relocating from that space costs money, time. Your business might be down for a while. So there is a very, very strong incentive to do all you can to stay in that space. So I think it very likely that if council were to approve a temporary use permit for, say, a year or two from now, we would be in a very similar situation with 40 letters coming in, a very strong public pressure to retain the business in the current situation. And as my staff report details, and as I mentioned earlier, the effects of a business like this being in the industrial area are invisible in a way. It is the business that moved on because they couldn't find a space. It is over time, landlords seeing that there's commercial businesses coming into the area and adjusting their lease rates to meet that new demand. And speaking with an industrial leasing firm recently, they said that industrial lease rates have been rising because there's huge demand on Vancouver Island for industrial land. I think that speaks to the need to retain industrial land for industrial uses. And as I mentioned earlier, if we lose industrial land, it's very, very difficult to get back.
Okay, thank you. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you, Chair. Just one more question through you to staff. There's been some concern expressed about businesses leaving Sydney and because of high rents or other things. I recall staff provided a report, put some information, I think in the last year, in regards to the number of new businesses that had started up in Sydney. My recollection was for at least a 1 year, I think it was in less than a year, the first year of COVID, that we had 65 new businesses.
It's about 80 businesses a year, I think, something like that.
So that's has that been fairly steady over the last couple of years?
Yes, yeah. The last couple of years have actually seen quite a few businesses relocate to Sydney.
Okay, so there has been a strong desire for businesses to set up here.
It certainly seems that way.
Yeah. Do we, I don't know if you have this information, but in terms of, do we keep track of how many of those might have been setting up on the industrial lands versus commercial? Do we have any info on that?
We certainly do have info on that. I don't have it with me at the moment, though. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, that's good. Thanks.
So, actually, I have a question for staff. If council is interested in going this temporary use permit route, you've mentioned that an OCP amendment would be required. That process obviously takes time. Sounds like a couple of months if council were to decide tonight that we want to go down that route. Would there be an opportunity for Pooch Parlour to continue to operate while that process played its way out? I understand that we can't issue them a business license now. It sounds like even if council wanted to go the temporary use permit, there might be a couple months shutdown unless we found a solution to that.
I think the OCP amendment could happen fairly quickly. I would think that some of the typical things typically associated with an OCP amendment, like a referral to the to the Agricultural Land Commission, for example, they're just not applicable. So it would be a fairly simple, as far as OCP amendments go, a fairly simple OCP amendment. I don't think there is a way to technically allow the business to remain open during that time.
Mr. Ho?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think in regards to what Corey's saying, I think our municipal solicitors would, if we were to ask them the question, and be careful what we ask, I think they would say that it would be in contravention of the zoning bylaw and the OCP, et cetera, and you're best not to allow the business to continue until the matter is addressed through the OCP amendment process. Thank you.
Thank you. So my understanding of that then is that we wouldn't be in a position to give them a license to authorize them to operate while this process worked out. I suppose our bylaw enforcement might not be very efficient, but there would be no legal way for us to allow them to operate.
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So committee, where do we go from here? Councillor Rentoul?
Thank you, and if the chair will give me the latitude, I'm not prepared to support the recommendation that's here, so I would like to explore some wording, whether it be through a temporary use permit triggering the OCP amendment, or whether it be the alternative that is referenced above the recommendation around moving this application further the process. The timeline, I think, as you had asked that question with respect to how that looks, if it's referred to the Advisory Planning Commission, is somewhat of a concern, knowing that the APC has spent a couple of meetings on the draft OCP and has another, as well as has 3 referrals waiting to reach Advisory Planning Commission. So it's likely adding some significant time to the process. Just so that my colleagues on the committee are aware that a referral to APC would cause, I think, probably in its own about a month's delay to the process. So I'll leave my comments there in the event it triggers any thoughts from others on committee.
Looking around, I will say that I'm not in favor of simply denying the application and having the business shut down. I'm also concerned about the long-term protection of our industrial land. So I wouldn't be willing to contemplate any kind of permanent relocation. But I certainly would be open to a temporary use that would allow an orderly transition to finding another location. And the kinds of comments I'd make, we're just going through our OCP review. There are some neighborhood commercial opportunities being proposed that would be an ideal fit for a dog grooming type of operation. There's a lot of mixed-use commercial opportunity. Everybody knows we've got a lot of construction on the go. There's a lot of commercial space that people are going to be trying to lease. This kind of commercial use is also very compatible to live-work units, which are something that is also being considered in various places. So I'm of the view that if there was some assurance that this wasn't going to be permanent and there was a reasonable amount of time for a transition, that would be a solution I could support. At any rate, I'll throw it open to the rest of the committee. Mayor McNeil-Smith? Or
I have a motion with some wording that we can begin kicking around if we'd like. I'll move that an official community plan amendment for the property at 2031 Malaview Ave West be approved as follows: to allow dog grooming as an M1 industrial use, and that a temporary use permit be granted for 2 years to allow Pooch Parlour to continue operating.
okay, I think that's going to need a bit of wordsmithing, but could I get a seconder?
Second.
Okay, that's moved and seconded. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. You covered a lot of the issues here that we definitely don't want to take anything out of our industrial land, but I'm also just kind of keenly aware of how easy it was to have made this mistake in the first place, especially knowing in Feed Barn and that grooming use has been there for a while. We know that since they're grandfathered in, if that business was to close or stop at any time, that land would be gained back as an industrial use as well. And so I'm not super worried about having a temporary use of a dog groomer in there, shifting it like an Overton window towards dog grooming everywhere permanently. It's, and I know some of the uses in there are kind of gray, and I feel this one is gray too. For the example of my office space that I used to work in, we serviced industrial clients, but not in exactly that area. So it wasn't really that we were serving those industrial clients, but certainly industrial ones. However, I know the industrial clients that we did serve had their head offices in downtown commercial areas. So we needed the space. Arguably, we needed a large warehouse to store our sampling gear. But listening to the way dog grooming works, it sounds like it's also very messy, and in a lot of ways has similarity with that dirtiness that kind of goes in an industrial area, as well as suitably a large commercial area. So I feel this is great, and I don't feel really bad about adding that in as a potential use here. Depending on the size of the operation, it could very well fit in some ways. But it also sounds like it just isn't going to end up overwhelming it, and I'm willing to take the risk of making sure that a business that we know has huge demand, we know has huge clientele, is not lost at a time when we're hemorrhaging just generally in our society, small businesses, for the potential effect it might have on other uses later at kind of a chaotic time in our society in general. Just, this is the devil we know. And finally, I think it might have a net positive benefit to the industrial side at this time, because I know what we've heard from the industrial, the West Side in general, is that they feel neglected in Sydney. They're across the highway, people don't go there, they don't think of them, they feel like they get less, service and attention from the town than, other businesses do. But if this business is this popular, and clearly it is very popular and well-liked, and people are coming over, it's going to bring a lot of people who maybe have never spent a lot of time in this side of town over to this side of town, who may begin frequenting some of, the restaurants and shops that are there, the butcher, and kind of bring some familiarity with our townspeople out to this area, however temporary that may be. And I can only see that as a benefit right now. So I think I understand staff's position, and I understand that's a position that I think their duty and their job compels them to take. But I think from our perspective and our duty, this is probably a solution we should go for.
Okay. I'm sure I've got a couple more speakers, but could I encourage staff to work on revising the wording of that motion? So Councillor Rintoul seconded, then I had Councillor Fallett's hand up, and Councillor O'Keefe, and then the mayor. Councillor Rintoul?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm inclined to support the motion. But my only concern when I heard it was the 2-year time frame, when staff had told us that the temporary use permit is typically 3 years, or perhaps it's illustrated in policy that it's 3 years. So I was a little leery of the 2 versus 3 years, and I'm also cognizant of the fact that there's a process to be undertaken here, and that time will slip quite quickly as a business owner, and I would rather not feel that there's a sword dangling over Kathy's head that she's going to have to move again and look for another place and keep that sort of worry in her mind. So that was the only aspect of it that I was concerned. I won't move an amendment at this point because I know staff are working on rewording it, but I wanted to share that.
If I may, it should be 3 if that's the standard. I remember the emails discussing that.
Staff?
Apologies if I wasn't clear earlier. It's up to 3 years or a time period determined by council, with the potential for one renewal for up to 3 years.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fallett?
Thank you. So this one is one of those tough ones. The rules are there, and I found it very interesting reading a number of the letters the writers have over the past years been very strong in saying to council, you must abide by the OCP. And yet, here they're writing to say, make an exception. And it is always the case that you don't, I'm speaking generally, I'm not speaking about you, Ms. Banks, I'm speaking generally, one doesn't pay attention to the rules, the OCP, whatever it is you want to use, until it impacts us. And then all of a sudden we say, I didn't know, or I don't like this, you need to make an exception. And I know from personal experience, Ms. Banks runs a good business and is good for her clients and is good for the community in the whole bit. Where I struggle with is we have a limited amount of industrial land that is very specific and very important to the overall economic formula for our municipality. And I appreciate Mr. Newcomb speaking about the amount of commercial business over on the west side, and if the West Side Village evolves as is presently anticipated, that the opportunity for commercial is going to move more over into the village section away from the industrial, in order that we maintain the industrial for its distinct purpose. And I also appreciate that having myself been a small business owner and having left one premises because the lease wasn't being renewed, the building was being redeveloped, and being caught in, where do I put my business? Where do I go? Either the space wasn't appropriate, or the price wasn't appropriate, or there was other mitigating circumstances. And I was fortunate, I did find something. Unfortunately, it was a lot more expensive. That was a decision I made at that time. What I'm saying is I do understand the dilemma of finding a space. Where I struggle is I also want to protect the industrial. I imagine that a customer is going to come along looking for industrial space to rent for their business and says, well, there's another business that it really doesn't need to be in industrial, it could be elsewhere. And I can't start up my business because I can't find. So if I step away from Pooch Parlour's application and look at the situation, the problem, for me it's black and white, is to say deny it. When I come in a little bit closer and I look at the impact in the community, the value of the business and whatnot, I start to waver and say, you know, we need to do what we need to do in order to save this business and make it a complete picture for the community. But I also have to look at everything else, and as it stands right now, I will not support the motion that's on the table. Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Just to echo some of Councillor Fallett's comments, and I agree, this is a very tough situation. Good business person, a need for this, and it's unfortunate circumstances, and I do believe that it was an honest mistake. Having said that, you know, I really take to heart staff's comments in terms of preserving our industrial area. During COVID, the pandemic, a lot of businesses struggled, our economy struggled, but the thing that got Sydney through is that we had a fairly diverse economy, and that's because of the industrial sector. So while the commercial sector, retail sector, service sector in the downtown area really struggled, it was those industrial areas that kind of helped pull the economy through. It kept a number of people working, and that had spin-off effects. And so I think it's really important that we preserve that space. You know, the challenge we have in Sydney is that we're just, we have a tiny little footprint, and there's nowhere else for industrial space. We've also heard from the Harbour Road area, the importance of maintaining that little bit of Harbour Road marine industry as well. So there's very few places for industry to expand. In terms of commercial, there's more opportunity down in the downtown core. I guess the other thing I'll comment on is in regards to the temporary use permit. I have a couple issues with that. First of all, I think if our intent is that it's only going to be temporary, and the reason for the temporary use permit is to allow the business owner to have time to go look for something else. From what I gather from staff, it seems the quickest we could do this would be 2 months. And she wouldn't be able to operate. So I guess, you know, what I would be advising that person is, or Ms. Banks, is that 2 months, you know, you're going to be out of business anyways. I would think that she would be using that time to go and find a more suitable space rather than dragging things out. Also, I think that if we were to go through with the temporary use permit, so we're going to have a public hearing and input from the community on the amendment for the OCP and perhaps the zoning bylaw. And I expect that we will hear from the Chamber of Commerce, and I expect that I would be wanting this to refer this to our Economic Advisory Committee. And I think that what we would hear from them is that they would not be in favor of this, that they would recognize that we need to preserve our industrial space. And, you know, while it's nice to think that we're going to preserve this one business, that may be the case. But as staff said, we're, I think, putting ourselves on a slippery slope to open the door for others to come forward. In terms of the comments about the west side feeling neglected and that this might be a good thing to have a business over there for them, I don't think they're feeling neglected because they don't have a dog grooming facility. They're feeling neglected because they don't have sidewalks and infrastructure and that sort of thing. I think that if we surveyed the industry over there, what they would say is, no, we need that space for some little other business there that's going to support, you know, Titan Boats or Nicholson Machinery or whatever. So I think we need to do that. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to add. I think, yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I can't support a temporary use permit. I also don't want to deny finding a potential resolution for this. But as I didn't put a motion forward first, I'll just speak to the motion that's on the floor. The reason I don't support a temporary use permit is partly from hearing some of the questions, or some of the answers to the questions myself and others asked with regards to temporary use permits. We would be amending the OCP to allow the other commercial uses. And that just opens the door to other businesses who, in the downtown or general commercial, retail service businesses, to say, you know, I can't make a go of it in the downtown. You know, I would like a temporary use permit for lower rent space in West Sydney. And the other thing is that we can't really impose conditions on the temporary use permit. Yes, we can impose a length of time, 2 years, but we cannot impose through this resolution that you have to relocate after 2 years. Quite frankly, there's an opportunity under the Local Government Act, whatever the length of time that we approve the temporary use permit, for the proponent to come back to the council of the day and request an extension to that temporary use permit up to 3 years, or quite frankly, request another amendment to the OCP zoning bylaw to make it more permanent. So I don't see a temporary use permit. A temporary use permit to me would be for the type of reason that Mr. Newcomb addressed within the type of industrial zone that already exists. To use a temporary use permit to bring in a type of business that is not in keeping with that particular zone, I don't think is an appropriate use of a temporary use permit. I do have another suggestion, but I will leave that to see whether this motion succeeds or fails or not before bringing it forward. But I will comment at this time that you know, Sydney's local economy is remarkable. It's remarkable in a number of ways. It's remarkable that the size of the economy in a community of 12,300 residents is the size that it is. I've lived in and done business in 4 or 5 other provinces, and for a community that is our size, it is remarkable. It's also remarkable for the diversity of the economy. To have the successful retail, service, hotel, tourism downtown, to have the marine industrial area on Harbour Road that is known throughout the Pacific Northwest for the businesses that operate there, to have the success of what I call the Sydney North Saanich West Business Park, because quite frankly the border is a little artificial going down the middle of McDonald Park Road when you look at the significant businesses that operate in Sydney and North Saanich in our respective municipalities, but also on the airport lands that are in our municipalities. And one of the reasons that we've had the success of this size and scope and diversity of the local economy is because of previous planning. It's because planners over time said, okay, let's make the downtown a commercial hub and allow these types of uses in the downtown. It would, you know, I researched the history of Sydney quite extensively, and we go back to between 1893, when the first town site was created in August of 1893, up to 1905. We had a cannery, we had a lumber mill, we had a wharf that was 300 feet long and 150 feet wide, and provided industrial uses, you know, to other parts of the Pacific Northwest. Over time, this community has evolved to the downtown, very successful downtown commercial core with those limited uses. And quite frankly, the Harbour Road Marine Industrial is another case in point of excellent planning over time, as is West Sydney, or the West Sydney North Saanich Business Park, and having the industrial, manufacturing, high-tech, transportation uses that we have there is quite remarkable. And so I thank staff for, you know, bringing to council's attention through the report that it's important that we give consideration. Council gives consideration in its policy decisions to what has led us to success in the past, what is giving us success now, and how we want to be consistent going forward. So again, I'm not suggesting denying these applications. I have another resolution to suggest, but I don't think a temporary use permit is the way to go forward. Thank you.
Okay, as chair, I'd like to just step in and see if we can find a direction that might have some likelihood of success, because I'm hearing that committee is split among denying the application, granting a temporary use permit, and some other solution that doesn't involve a temporary use permit. So could I simply get a show of hands, straw poll kind of thing, for the number that are in favor?
Could we hear the revised motion first, please, Chair?
Yeah.
It might help for context.
Okay. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the suggested revised motion is that staff be directed to bring forward an OCP bylaw amendment and a commercial temporary use permit to allow a personal service establishment at Unit 101, 2031 Malaview Avenue West.
Okay, so this is a spot zoning kind of thing but in the OCP.
No, the
Nope.
the OCP amendment bylaw would deal with the allowance of the temporary use within the industrial area for an industrial use.
Okay.
And the temporary use permit would be specific to Unit 101-2031 Malaview
Okay.
Avenue.
So we've got a clear motion. Is that acceptable to the mover?
If that's the only way it can be done, I guess. I was trying to get at what I was asking Mr. Newcomb earlier, that if we can add as an M1 industrial land use, dog grooming, so it can be a commercial use or an M1 industrial use, because it sounds like we have the ability to do that, then we're not having to change this land. We're not losing industrial land at all. We're granting a temporary use for, I mean, I guess if we add that in, she could be there anyway, you know, in perpetuity, because it comes that type of a use. But in that case, I don't know why we'd ever have a temporary use for something that was already industrial in industrial land. So this is what I was trying to get at here, was that we trying to get at something where we don't rezone it, but we can change the OCP to change the uses that are allowed in that zone, and a temporary use permit for this business in that zone.
Is that clear to staff?
Which zone?
Is this currently M1 industrial? Yes.
I wonder if what you're asking is that the temporary use authorization that council puts into an amended OCP could be made more specific to deal with this particular situation.
Mm-hmm.
So the Local Government Act says an official community plan may designate areas where temporary uses may be allowed. So that area could be a single property. That area, I guess, could potentially be part of a building. It could be a more specific situation. I would say that's not a typical way to approach temporary use permits, but
Okay, so let's back up. So currently, what our big problem right now is, this is a commercial use that we can't offer a commercial TUP for an industrially zoned area. Which sounds like then the only place we could ever offer a commercial temporary use is in a commercial zone. So what are the what would be the reason that I would be offering only a temporary use in in a place where it's already allowed?
could you rephrase the question,
Okay.
please?
So our problem is, we have to change the OCP to allow this dog grooming business from M1 to C1.
No.
Okay, so this is the thing that we're arguing about, is that we're
So-
going to lose our industrial land because we have to rezone it to allow it.
Councillor Duncan, if you could just let Mr. Newcomb answer. I
Yeah.
think M1's the zone, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you could potentially add personal service establishment as a use, as a
Yes.
permitted use in the M1 industrial zone.
Yes.
In that case, and keep in mind that the Local Government Act says that any zoning bylaw that a municipality adopts must be consistent with the official community plan.
Yeah.
So the official community plan would also need to be amended to say something, in that case, if you added that as permitted use, the OCP would need to be amended to say something like, this is an industrial area, but council is also willing to allow a certain level of commercial uses in this area.
Okay, so I guess what I've been tripping over is, dog grooming is defined as a commercial use according to whom?
Our zoning bylaw.
Right. So this is what I'm saying, is that why can't we redefine it as a potential industrial use and simply have it elsewhere in the table? Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think the purpose of redefining it in that case would be to achieve a bit of a workaround to allow this business to remain.
Yes.
I'm not sure that would be a proper. so the town has, I don't know, now a 10-year history, just referring to this zoning bylaw, which has been in place for 10 years, of calling personal service establishments a commercial use in its zoning bylaw. To then all of a sudden say, well, we've decided this is an industrial use, I'm not sure would be seen as a proper way to go about addressing this situation. I would say what I just said previously, which is that we acknowledge it's a commercial use, amend the M1 zone to allow for that use, and prior to doing that, we would need to amend the OCP to say the town is willing to allow some level of commercial use in its industrial area. We could be specific and say personal service establishments are also permitted. But I think we would need to acknowledge that it's a commercial use, given that, you know, we have a long history of considering it a commercial use. So that's one way to do it. The other way is to amend the current wording for temporary use permits to say specifically that the town is willing to consider commercial temporary use permits in its industrial area. Maybe it's a way of testing out certain uses. I would advise against it because I think commercial and industrial businesses have very different economics behind them. And indirectly, it's weakening the industrial area, but council can certainly do that. Council could decide that it's no longer industrial over there at all and redesignate the whole area to commercial and rezone it to commercial. That's your prerogative. I think staff would advise against that too. What I'm saying is, I guess there's two ways to do it if you want that use there. One is temporary. Amend the OCP to allow temporary commercial temporary use permits and then issue a temporary use permit. Or amend the OCP to open the door to commercial uses in the industrial west side and add personal service establishment as a permitted use to the M1 zone.
Okay, and so the wording that Mr. Humble has read out is the former.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I would defer to the way you would word it then.
And there's, within those two options, there's a range of specificities that council might wish to consider. Like with other zoning amendments, we've made them specific to a single site. And in the zoning bylaw, we say specifically.
Can I just interrupt for a second? So it sounds like the motion is now okay to the mover.
Yeah.
Can I confirm that that motion is okay to the person who seconded it?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, could we have the motion one more time? And then we actually have a motion on the floor. So,
The motion reads that staff be directed to bring forward an OCP bylaw amendment and a commercial temporary use permit to allow a personal service establishment at Unit 101, 2031 Malaview Avenue West.
okay, so I'll just note that we've been almost an hour and a half on this agenda item. I think we've had a pretty good discussion. People,
Point of order, I
Yep.
believe Councillor Garnett wanted to speak to the motion.
I do understand. I actually had a few others. I'm just going to encourage people to, we need to make a decision on this sometime tonight. So we've got to kind of move towards actually voting on a motion. Councillor Garnett, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I am interested to hear what Mayor McNeil-Smith's suggestion is, because I think a compromise is in order. I do want to respect the integrity of the industrial sector and don't necessarily support a temporary use permit, as has been discussed in the revised motion and sort of the original motion. I do have some concerns that I want to raise, and I do think it was an honest mistake. Even though it is incumbent upon a business owner to make sure they follow through on everything that's necessary before they get a lease, just to protect yourself. But I also would think that that perhaps we as a staff or town or staff and a council should send a letter to the person who subleased this space, acknowledging to them they can't do this again, because they should know the rules themselves. And so they put the business owner in an awkward predicament, and it really isn't fair. One thing I'm struggling with here is in intended uses which support primary industrial businesses and their employees. And we mentioned restaurants and convenience stores, and I understand that because in the carrying out of your duties, they need to eat if they didn't bring lunch, dinner, food, depending on the shift. I don't understand fitness centers. I understand mental well-being and increased productivity, sure, but you could also say that with the pet grooming, because many industries I've been in the shops, they have a shop dog, and the shop dog could go to a groomer while they're there, and still that's offering support to a business in an industrial sector. So there's arguments to be made from every angle on this if you really want to. As confusing as that may add to all the rest of the confusion. So where do we stand with this? And sorry, I'm trying to be as quick as I can here because I know you want to move on with it. I think I like to find a compromise if I can, and so although I don't support the motion on the floor, I'm really interested to hear what the mayor has, because he suggested something similar in terms of a compromise that we could maybe reach for to help this person, because contrary to comments made earlier, the industrial sector, as important as it is to our community, is not the most important thing, and it did not carry us through the pandemic. The small businesses are the backbone of this country, and really the retail stores, the coffee shops, the grocery stores, the delivery personnel, those are the people that carried us through the pandemic, and they never get their due. And so it's an important economic driver in our community, but every aspect of our community is important from an economic perspective, and we have to keep it all in perspective. Thank you, Chair.
Mayor McNeil-Smith?
Thank you. A question through you, Chair, to staff with regards to the motion as presented on the floor. If that amendment was made to the OCP as worded, would other personal services establishments be able to apply? I guess they would only be able to apply for temporary use permits. They still wouldn't be able to have a business license, pursue a business license.
So with that OCP amendment in place, partially it depends on the wording of the amendment, but say it was a broad amendment like commercial temporary use permits will be considered in the industrial area. Any commercial business could come forward with a temporary use permit application, and council could approve it with resolution, and the act requires notice. No bylaw amendments necessary.
Okay, through you, Chair. But as I heard, this resolution is making specific reference to the address of this particular business.
Again, through the mayor, through the chair to the mayor, not with respect to the OCP amendment, but with respect to the actual temporary use permit application.
Okay, so thanks for that clarification. So one last time, it would be allowing, it would open the possibility of any commercial business applying for a temporary use permit in the industrial zone. And I understand the temporary use permit, as temporary use permits are very specific to a particular business at a particular location. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So section 492 of the Local Government Act provides for the option to issue temporary use permits. And what it says is, an official community plan may designate areas where temporary uses may be allowed and specify general conditions regarding the issue of temporary use permits in those areas. So by that reading, I would say that council is within their prerogative to specify, a condition that says temporary use permits may only be issued for commercial uses in the industrial area if ... if they're a personal service establishment or something like that. So you could get more specific than any commercial temporary use permit. You could be very specific about what kind of temporary use permit you issue, or you're willing to consider issuance of for that area.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just leave my last comments with, again, I don't appreciate or I don't understand why we would, open the door to other commercial uses possibly, but even if we did restrict it as staff is indicating, that I think we have to ask ourselves, why would you issue it? Why are you issuing a temporary use permit in this situation? For a 2-year period. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Mayor McNeil-Smith, could I ask you to explain the alternative you were thinking about proposing if this motion failed. I've heard a request from your colleagues.
Certainly, we don't normally do that when there's a motion on the floor, but under the circumstances, I can say that there's a fair bit of motivation behind it, and normally I would look for a seconder before motivating. But quite frankly, it's not you can refer to it as a compromise. I don't see it necessarily as a compromise. It's really, I think, the other decision we have, otherwise denial, and that is to amend the OCP and the zoning bylaw to allow personal service establishments within the M1 zone. And again, I would make, while I've heard colleagues speak against that in certain respects, I have motivation points that I would make to support that. But again, it stems from not supporting the temporary use permit for the reasons I've given, and other motivation that I haven't yet spoken to in terms of supporting amendments to the OCP and zoning bylaw.
Councillor Duncan?
I'm sorry, Chair, but this is what I was asking staff if we could do. And then they said that we couldn't, that was a commercial use. And so I said, can we make it a temporary use permit? So I'm just so confused right now about what we are and are not allowed to do. Because this is what I would have liked to do, and then offer the temporary use permit so that it wasn't a permanent taking away.
Okay, so if I could ask Mayor McNeil-Smith?
Yeah, just 2 points. 2 points. One is that under the motion that I would move, if there wasn't a motion on the floor, we wouldn't be considering a temporary use. You could consider a temporary use permit, but if you are amending the OCP and the zone to include personal service establishments, I'm not sure what the reason would be to go into a temporary use permit situation. But if I can go back to earlier comments that you made, and that's the distinction through your questioning through the staff, was with regards to, well, how do we decide what types of businesses are in a category like personal services, or how do we decide that it's restaurants and gyms and convenience stores? They're in a class. And the answer that came back from staff is, when we're doing our zoning, we determine which uses will fall into those pieces, sort of thing. So we are making a distinction between M1 and C1, commercial, but currently commercial uses such as restaurants, convenience stores, and fitness centers are commercial uses permitted in the M1 industrial zone in our zoning.
So if I could summarize my understanding, we've got the motion that's currently on the floor that was proposed, which is to provide a temporary use permit solution. We have an alternative solution, which is actually to essentially expand the allowed uses in the industrial zone to include pet grooming, and that would be a permanent solution, not temporary. And then the third option is to deny the application. I don't know which way we're going to go, but we're probably going to wind up doing a bit of tweaking of one of those options. And what I'd like to do is try to get committee to clarify which one of those options are we going to try to tweak. So, Councillor Rentoul.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I support a resolution for this small business owner. I'm not inclined to think that a 400 square foot pet grooming business is endangering the industrial area. And frankly, for that matter, a changes such as the mayor has introduced, I don't think is a threat to the industrial area either. At this point, my preference would be, having heard what the mayor is prepared to move, to support that and eliminate the reference to temporary use, because I gauge from the conversation there's a number of colleagues concerned with temporary use. So my preference would be to see the mayor move his motion, and I'd support that. Thank you.
Okay. We still have this motion on the floor, and I could simply call the question, and if it's defeated, we'll move on to another motion.
honestly don't know what to do because I heard like the arguments that I heard against my motion were we don't want any commercial uses to degrade the industrial land, and that's staff's argument. So I came up with what I thought was a compromise, which was it would not be a permanent degradation. We'll allow commercial uses and a temporary, under only temporary use. But what I'm hearing is the better alternative that makes people happier is we will allow commercial uses anywhere permanently, which sounds like that would be a permanent degradation of industrial land and would be in the opposite direction and would be more likely to fail given the arguments I've heard. So I'm really averse to withdrawing my motion.
If I could
rather than
suggest,
wordsmithing it,
let's
if that's not
withdraw the motion,
Okay.
let's just vote on it,
Call the question?
and we'll see where it goes. So all in favor of, everyone's clear on the motion? Do we need to read it back? Good. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, that's 5 opposed, the motion fails. Now we need a different motion. Did you want, Mayor McNeil-Smith?
Thank you, Chair. I would move that we amend the OCP and the zoning bylaw to permit personal service establishments in the M1 zone in the West Sydney.
And do I have a seconder?
Second.
Staff, are there any issues that you see with that wording? Nope, okay. Mayor McNeil-Smith?
Thank you, Chair. So this may seem inconsistent with some of my earlier remarks when I spoke to some of the history and how we became successful with our local economy by sticking to the knitting, if you will, coming up with a plan and having a defined industrial zone, having a defined downtown commercial retail, hospitality, having a dedicated Harbour Road Marine Industrial and so forth. We've learned by experience to date that within the M1 industrial zone that we've permitted limited commercial uses, restaurants, convenience stores, and fitness centers, and I don't think it's, in the 21 years that I've been here and been a small business owner on the downtown side of Sydney, seen a degradation of our industrial zone. I believe that if we were to allow personal service establishments, when we see the description of that in the staff report, it's a very limited number of types of personal establishment businesses. It didn't come, I don't believe it came before council, or yes, I think it might have come before council in terms of a comment, is we had a barber sometime earlier in our term came forward. They had actually set up in the M1 zone, and they were advised that it was not in keeping with the zoning, and they withdrew. They closed. They had done renovations. Unfortunately, they'd made the same mistake as this proponent, and they'd gone ahead and done renovations and signed a lease prior to pursuing a business license. But they have relocated successfully in downtown Sydney. And I think that the number of personal establishment businesses, such as a barber or pet grooming, will not degrade our industrial area in the long term, for 2 reasons. One, I just don't think the square footage that they will take up will be significant. But second is, up until recently, so for several decades, we have had the 8-acre site that is currently being redeveloped as the Amazon warehouse sit vacant. We've had there was a business that tried there and didn't go. We had approximately 5 acres across for that Amazon site, and Titan Boats and their manufacturing is taking up about half that location. There's still probably 2 or 3 acres there for businesses, and there are other significant industrial lands available on airport lands for industry, and the airport has indicated that in their annual presentations to the community. So I don't think this is a degradation of the industrial zone in the longer term, and I think in not going down the route of temporary use permits for certain commercial uses, which opens the door to any commercial business saying, I can't make a go of it downtown, I want to locate there. We're being very specific to this. And if we wanted to, or staff wanted to make a recommendation, if this came forward, to limit the personal service establishments even narrower than what the wording is in the staff report, I would be in agreement to that. The other thing is the other comment I want to make is that, like other councillors, I understand as a local business owner that mistakes like this happen, and it's not a consideration for me. I think you've heard from several colleagues. It's not a concern that you made a mistake and we're trying to penalize or what have you, or make a decision based on that. That's a situation that occurred, and you've come forward and you've made your application, and that's the case. But this body, council, and this is a message to those who are here or to the community, is that council is charged with, or tasked with, setting policy for the community, for areas of the community, whether it's residential, whether it's environmentally sensitive areas, and that's what we're doing through our OCP. We shouldn't be having individual businesses come forward with their personal circumstances and us finding solutions or looking at solutions for individual businesses. It's already within the Local Government Act and Community Charter that we're not to provide direct assistance to a business. We're not doing that through a temporary use permit. But again, if we make accommodations for this temporary use, or through a temporary use permit, I can tell you that in my 21 years in downtown, there have been in excess of 100 businesses change hands or close over time. That's a part of the small business community. So I can believe that there would be other businesses come forward at some point of time if we were to make an accommodation specifically for this particular situation. Thank you.
Councillor Garnet?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff. The recommendation that was put forward, do we need the specific amendment numbers for both of those, or as part of the recommendation, or is that just something staff will add after?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Garnet, so we'll deal with the mechanics when we bring that forward. Yeah.
Thank you.
So it's not necessary at this point.
Thank you.
Sorry, if I may, there's maybe one point of clarification. So what is being, I think, proposed is the suggestion is a blanket sort of permitted use for all personal service establishments within the industrial zone. There are options that, if council so desires, to bring forward that would place limitations on that particular use, such as making it conditional to a specific property. But not sure whether or not council wants to go to those particular options, but we could bring those forward if council wishes.
So, Councillor Garnet, you still have the floor.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate that thank you, Mayor McNeil-Smith. Some excellent points brought forward, and thank you for the resolution.
Okay, I've got Councillor O'Keefe, then Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you. So I'm not in favor of this motion. I think it absolutely will degrade our industrial area. So despite the comments made, what we're proposing here is we're throwing the doors open to the M1 area to say, any of you personal businesses operating in Sydney, rents are cheaper over there, and you're welcome to go and set up business there. So I have a real concern about that. And to say, the comment that it hasn't been, that we have had some businesses over there and it hasn't been an issue. It hasn't been an issue, and it hasn't degraded the industrial area thus far, because it has been very strictly controlled by staff about the sorts of things that can operate. And so that's why there hasn't been, we've been able to maintain our industrial area. By doing these, we're just opening the floodgates and allowing that to take place. So I can't see a good reason for doing this. And if council passes this and it goes to public hearing and we seek feedback from the community, I'm quite certain we'll hear from the business community on the west side, from our Economic Advisory Committee, from the Chamber of Commerce, that they're concerned that council is allowing that degradation of industrial lands to take place. So I really don't see anything to be able to support this. I just really think it's the wrong decision to make. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Mayor McNeil-Smith and Councillor Fowler.
Yes, one of my questions was just through you, Chair, was Mr. Humble's comment in terms of conditions. One of the conditions you can also place is, say, a maximum square footage.
Yeah, there's various conditions that you can place on a particular use, and in making it a conditional use, and square footage is one.
Okay, thank you. And I might consider that when that came before us, or if staff gave it consideration. I just want to respond to the comment just made with regards to opening the floodgates to any personal business. It's not opening it to any personal business. It's opening it to the personal service businesses as described within this use. So you wouldn't have personal businesses like a dental clinic or a massage therapist or physiotherapist or other personal type uses. It would be very limited to these uses. And in the comments I made, if you look at these types of uses and the likelihood that there would be a large number or a large square footage dedicated to these particular uses in the M1 zone, I think would be limited. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Fallon?
Thank you. I won't be supporting the motion. Echo Councillor O'Keefe's comments, and to say that having listened to staff and the comment that we've got the West Side Village, as that evolves, it opens the opportunity for commercial space, mixed commercial, residential space and whatnot. There will be the opportunity. And although, as I'm speaking against the motion, and that seemingly may be taken personal, is not about Pooch Parlour, it's not about Ms. Banks. I have full compassion and full empathy for the situation you're in, but I'm looking also at the larger picture in all of this, and what is to stop another business from coming and saying, can you amend what is allowed in what section are we talking about? Industrial, thank you. What do we allow on the industrial side, and you know, and have an appropriate argument saying you must consider me because we recently had an application for new development on Harbour Road in the marine section, and there we have a covenant on title stating that for the residences that are going to be there, that they understand that this is a working marine neighborhood and that they have to take that into consideration when they buy their residential unit. And so that is protecting the Harbour Road marine industry. And I think the same thing needs to happen here. We need to protect the industrial section, and I'm not prepared to support adding another service, another industry, another business that can go into the industrial section. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor O'Keefe?
Councillor Fallon just made me think of something. I'll just add in, you know, a previous comment was made about, you know, businesses make decisions and sometimes they make mistakes, and it's not up to council to expend energy to find a solution to a misstep that they've made. Yet that's kind of what we're doing. We've invested a huge amount of time here. We're talking about amending the OCP and the zoning bylaw for one business, and I'm very sympathetic to them. But I think staff have laid out very well why we have a zoning bylaw, why we have certain uses, about protecting the industrial zone. And as Councillor Fallon says, I'm concerned about this precedent that we're setting, that we're going through contortions here to accommodate one business in one specific situation. And so what's to stop another business is to say, hey, Sydney Council is pretty flexible. If you don't like the zoning, all you got to do is go apply to them for an OCP amendment and a zoning bylaw. And so I think we have to preserve the integrity of those lands, of our zoning bylaw, of our OCP, and the good advice that I think staff have given us on this.
Councillor Rento?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I hope a takeaway is that people go out in the community and say, Sydney Council's flexible to business. I hope they do. I hope they see this as a council having listened to what is frankly not as unique to Pooch Parlour as we may be thinking. It's chronic. It's a case of a business, unable to operate in the town center because of the changing landscape, and we all recognize that. We all see that. So this is a byproduct of what's happened, and we have to evolve with it too. And we're looking at changing the OCP or amending the OCP through a process. So I don't feel like we're contortionists here, or we're trying to move mountains. It's a process that exists for exactly this type of reason, to amend that guide, that roadmap for us. It's not chiseled in stone. So I'm happy to support the motion, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'll point out we're coming up close to 2 hours on this now. So hopefully I'm going to have the last word. I will vote in favor of this one. To me, I think the key thing here is we're looking at a situation which is an honest mistake and not an unreasonable mistake given the things going on around it. So this isn't a case of a business making a strategic effort to take advantage of an opportunity to maybe get an exemption. And councils very frequently get requests from developers for, oh, we've got this difficulty, can we have a variance? Please, sir, and I believe that the future councils will have the necessary intestinal fortitude to not give in to that kind of thing. But when there is an honest mistake, I think it is reasonable for council to try to be flexible and do something about it. I'm prepared to support either the temporary use or the permanent. I would like to see the scope narrowed, but I'm still fine with the permanent. So anyway, I'm going to call the question. All in favor of the motion? Opposed? It's 2 opposed. The motion's carried. Okay, do we need anything further on this? No? Okay, so this recommendation will go from committee of the whole to council, the next council meeting, and it will be dealt with there. It sounds like there's quite a bit of process to go through. I would thank you for, it's a difficult situation, but one thing you've done is you've generated probably quite a lot of publicity about how important the OCP is, and that we're going through the OCP review right now. So I would strongly encourage people to pay attention, because the details of what's in there spin out in things like this tonight. Anyway, thank you. We'll move on to the next item, which is... Sorry? Yep.
I'd like to thank the mayor and council and the staff as well. Wonderful, thank you.
Okay. So we'll just give people a minute to clear out. Okay, so we've got 2 items left on the agenda, and they're quite significant. So at any rate, we'll just move on. So the first item is 8A, which is staff report, climate action plan, draft and engagement update. And we have a presentation by our climate action coordinator, Kira Gilmauer.
Chair, if I may,
Yep.
we'll see how this goes, but I anticipate suggesting that 8B be tabled to a future meeting.
Yep.
I'm happy to do that now, unless we want to see how this goes.
Let's see how it goes.
Thank you.
And if you could push the button.
I'm just going to start a timer for myself to keep track. Okay. I was told to have 10 minutes, so that's what I'm going to give you today, at least close to 10 minutes. To those of you who don't know me, my name is Kira, and I'm the Climate Action Coordinator for the town. And over the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to provide a brief update on the development of the plan and some next steps. So you got some bikers there. Maybe. Oh, no, it is not. Knew I'd missed something technology-wise. Pointing this way? Maybe. I knew something would happen. Okay, there we go. Thank you, Corey. So this slide shows an overview of the process to date. A couple key points here are the 2 engagement phases, one in the fall and winter of 2021, with both public engagement and staff engagement in-house, and some upcoming engagement that I will revisit at the end of the presentation. I will also note that the plan has gone through multiple stages of in-house review with staff from across the organization. So this is an overview of part 1 of the plan, and this part of the plan serves to help readers understand the purpose of the plan and the importance of addressing climate change and climate action, as well as providing an overview of our existing conditions, so kind of where we are today. So what are our climate risks, increasing temperatures, sea level rise, that kind of thing, extreme weather, how many emissions are we producing, both as an organization, corporately, and throughout the community, as well as what goals we're working towards. So the OCP process has established a goal of 50% emissions reductions by 2030, and a goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. I will also acknowledge that these targets are only really achievable with major action at provincial and federal levels, like massive investment in public transit and renewable energy, but the town still has a really important role to play in our own areas of jurisdiction to meet those goals as well. So then I'll spend most of this presentation talking about part 2 of the plan, which is where it gets more into the nitty-gritty of the actions. So part 2 of the plan breaks down all 46 actions into 8 focus areas, which I'll go over in the following slides. These will just be a really high-level overview to give you a taste of what you'll find in the plan, but more of the detail will be in the plan itself. Next slide, yeah. So the town leadership focus area highlights what we can do to reduce emissions we produce as an organization. And this is particularly important to address our vehicle fleet and our municipal buildings, so town hall, CSB, since those are the vast majority of our emissions. Town leadership is also about addressing, how we can embed climate action considerations into our decision making. So, kind of the day-to-day integration of climate change when we're, writing policy and that kind of thing, approving projects. Next slide. Next is infrastructure. So this addresses how we as the town can work to make sure our physical infrastructure is as resilient to climate risks as possible. So some of the ones identified in part 1, like extreme weather and sea level rise. This doesn't necessarily mean, I'm going to tell you to upsize all of our pipes, but rather that there's a need to evaluate different options available to address these risks through our asset management processes, and the importance of starting to think about these things early so we have time to make those decisions without spending all our money in 1 year kind of thing. Next slide. Next up is transportation and mobility. This is the community's main source of emissions, which also means it's the biggest opportunity to see reductions. The approach we used in the plan was to look at the barriers identified by community members through the public engagement process to see what needs to be done to address those. And some of the most significant opportunities, some of the most significant barriers were, bike parking and bike routes, unsurprisingly. So the plan includes some actions to address these both through, policy and regulatory side, as well as, some more physical projects we can implement, capital projects like installing more bike racks in strategic locations. Next slide. So the idea behind land use here as a focus area is to acknowledge that the physical layout of our community impacts people's decision making, a little bit as we saw in our previous presentation. This highlights that there's value in locating people near the businesses that they want to go to so that it's more convenient to bike or walk or use transit. For example, the OCP is proposing neighborhood commercial policy areas so that people, living away from the downtown can have the opportunity to, meet up for coffee or grab a quick snack close to home without having to jump in their cars. The next one is buildings. This is our second biggest source of emissions in the community, with switching to electricity being, an essential element of meeting our emissions reductions targets. Being on fossil fuels just isn't compatible with 50% reductions and carbon neutrality by 2050. Buildings are a key focus area, also because climate action initiatives here often address both emissions reductions and improving resilience, so you kind of get 2 for 1 in some of these actions. For example, installing more heat pumps and having policy to support that. Both reduces emissions because they're electric heat pumps, but also makes our homes more resilient by having cooling in heat waves, so our homes feel safer and more comfortable year round as the climate is changing. And the biggest barrier identified by residents, also unsurprisingly, was cost, showing both the value of our municipal top-up rebates that we're offering as a town, but also in helping people navigate the many financial incentives that are already available through the province and federal government, including a brand new one a couple weeks ago with the income qualified program that's for specifically with people who have very low income and can support up to 90% of the costs of installing a heat pump or that kind of thing. That's pretty exciting. Next slide. For the natural environment, this focus area acknowledges that our ecosystems are both impacted by climate change and can also help us reduce the impacts of climate change in our community by supporting stormwater management and providing weather protection, like from rain and sun and that kind of thing, and kind of acting a bit of like insulation on the outside to our buildings. It also highlights that hard infrastructure isn't the only option in tackling sea level rise, so we can also consider where, green shores approaches might be appropriate for the town, and that's something we can look through, longer term planning. Next slide. Next up, second last one, we've got emergency preparedness. This is an element of adaptation, so this is where we have the opportunity to assess some of the nearer term risks or where some of the long-term risks might be happening sooner than we might hope, and how we can respond to those. So again, like the heat wave this summer, trying to be proactive in preparing and making sure we're able to be responsive to that. And emergency preparedness is also a really good opportunity for public education about risks like flooding and heat, and how the community can be proactive in preparing their own households, not just relying on the town for certain things as well. Next slide. Last but not least, food and waste. While waste is, a smaller contributor to our community's emissions, there's still opportunities for reductions by minimizing our organic waste that goes to Heartland Landfill, because there's not the, it's not the environment where organics break down properly, so they produce methane, which is a bigger greenhouse gas. And like 83% of people said they already compost. There was some people who highlighted that this is trickier in our multifamily buildings, like condos and rentals. So there's some opportunities maybe to address some challenges there. Community feedback also showed very strong support for a single-use plastics bylaw. That was the highest supported part of the whole survey. So I thought I would highlight that as well. And next steps. Our engagements, so with the draft plan assembled for a first round of review, the next step is getting feedback and making revisions where needed. Staff are proposing 2 different engagement options, acknowledging that there's a lot of other engagement happening right now with the official community plan and the active transportation plan launching as well. Both options have online and print advertising and having the draft plan open for public review for a certain period of time with opportunity for comment either through just open email to the climate action at Sydney inbox or potentially in like an open-ended survey monkey just so it's all kind of in one place. But then option 1 also has a couple pop-up tables to bring the plan to the public and reach people who might not be keeping track online necessarily, and maybe some people who wouldn't normally think to check out climate action just of their own innate whim. And this is the one that I would recommend, is option 1. Yeah, that's the end if you want to go to the next slide. any questions.
Are there questions from committee? Councillor Garnet?
Thank you, Chair. The pop-up, do you have any idea where you might want to put those?
It was kind of an open suggestion at this point, but I was thinking potentially one on a weekend and one on a weekday, maybe like at Beacon, downtown Beacon Park with the bandshell area, and maybe another park, or maybe at the, what else is happening? I hadn't set on specific locations at this point, but definitely one at Beacon Park I think would be good, somewhere downtown.
If I may, on page 29 of the report, under town leadership actions, and it speaks with partner with the CRD and other local governments mentioning particularly Central Saanich and North Saanich. I wonder if we could give a possibility of adding in the Wasanich Leadership Council as another group that we could reach out to there. Something that I would think we might be able to add into that.
Sorry, which section is this?
Page 29.
Okay.
Under partnerships, if we could
Okay,
add
yes.
Wasanich Leadership Council into that particular bar, I think that would be a good idea.
For sure.
I'm wondering with regards to page 18. Sorry, I'm bouncing all over the place. Natural environment. Speaking of conserving and enhancing cities' urban forest, and I'm wondering about how well that aligns with the urban forest strategy. It mentioned when they did the study, we have 14.4% canopy, which was pretty much the lowest in the CRD, or one of the lowest. And it speaks to between 2019 and 2030 no net loss, which doesn't really talk about it. That's not really enhancing for me. That's basically the conserving part's there, but the enhancing part really, to me, doesn't align well there. I'm not sure how we could phrase that differently. I would have hoped that the urban forest strategy, at the time when we did it, I was hoping the numbers would have been more aggressive. That was my personal opinion. And so I would like to see somehow that align better with your document, which I actually like better, just at a point of reference. Also, with regard to, sorry, I'm going through my pages here, and the very last page 51, moderate flooding as a risk, and it speaks to the urban environment and impermeable surfaces. And I guess I'm concerned with the way the Oakville Orchard neighborhood is being developed and how that's being impacted with and Councillor Duncan brought that up when we were looking at developments, and how that particular neighborhood, as it gets developed, one house goes down, two goes up, 2, 4, how the impermeability is lost as we create more hard spaces that put more wear and tear on our infrastructure. So that's another area where I just had this, like, it popped out of me, like, how is that going to work? And then as far as the electric aspect, electric vehicles, switching people to electric, I see that as a way that we should be going. But the other side of it, the flip side, is if you look at the extreme heat in the summers and how that's going to impact the fact that, and we're having less snow caps and less water coming down, and how that's going to lower the water in terms of overall as drying, as hot as it is, and you've seen creeks and rivers drying up. How does that impact our electric capacity going forward if we're switching everybody to electric and not having, all cars by 2030 or whatever are supposed to be other sources? If everybody's plugging in to charge their car and it's 39 degrees outside every day for 2 weeks and everybody's got their air conditioning on, and meanwhile the water that we need for electricity is dropping, how does that all play together? Like, I know you don't have the answer, but I'm wondering, when I read your document, I'm like, how does that, it's a good goal to have, but how does that work when those things don't align together? Like, they almost fight each other, sort of. So I'll leave those comments.
I can respond briefly to the
Sure.
last piece, just for some context. BC Hydro often talks about electrical capacity into the future, and at this point they say, they're confident about the ability to meet projected demand with EVs on the rise. I would say that's definitely more of a BC Hydro question for electrical capacity, but a lot of that will also be dependent on, various infrastructure throughout the whole province as well, not just, in Sydney and the CRD. But I will say, as well, CRD has said our, water supplies are very strong in the CRD because we're not reliant on, melting ice caps or anything like that on glaciers. So our water sources are also resilient, as far as my understanding goes from my conversations.
I'm not worried about the consumption aspect, but our electricity tends to come from other places, and actually, knowing a person who's a manager of BC Hydro, I don't think we realize how tenuous that underground cable is and how we could lose power really quickly and really easily, and it's old and it needs to be upgraded, and it's extremely difficult to do that. But I'll leave that for another day. Thank you very much for your report. I thought it was good. There's a lot of good information in here. I hope people read it. And people need to get on board with doing the right thing, and hopefully this will prompt them to do that. So thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I've got a speakers list. It's Councillor O'Keefe, then Mayor McNeil-Smith, then Councillor Duncan, then Councillor Fallon. Councillor O'Keefe?
Hi, thank you for that. So I have some questions and some comments, and maybe my comments I can email you later, because there's a few, so I'll just touch on them. But in terms of the climate risks, one of the things I noticed, we talked mainly about the heat waves and the or the storm surges, but I didn't see anything about high winds. And so talking about, in other places, they're expecting not just storm surges like waves, but like how wind, which was a big factor here. We're starting to see that a lot more. So is that something you think we want to factor in there somewhere? And I'm thinking of it, how it's a risk in terms of, power outages and how we would deal with that. So is that something we might want to consider, do you think, or?
I'll start responding to as a climate risk generally. Kind of the methodology that I used for establishing the climate risks in the plan was to follow, provincial climate risks. That was kind of how each one of them is labeled, is from the provincial risk assessment, just because we don't necessarily have the capacity in-house to figure out what are all of our Sydney's climate risks specifically. So I kind of pulled a lot from what's the province saying and what's the CRD saying, and then localizing that with local knowledge. I think one of the handy things in some ways with climate action is that a lot of the times, addressing one risk will often address another risk. So things like wind, if we are having a resilient urban forest, like that kind of thing can also help, address wind and, how we're thinking about these things. Definitely something that I can consider for updated revisions and seeing what can be done about it. But just to give you some context.
Yeah, okay, yeah. No, I think it's worth considering putting it in there. I think it's, maybe it's not in the provincial thing, but I think it's something that's pretty unique to us. And I think we're getting more of them. And in terms of mitigating things, so, maybe we're doing it already, like things like putting in more underground wiring, and also in terms of our emergency planning component, looking at what are the things that emergency planning committee would need to think about if there was a mass power outage, and how does that impact the community and our services and stuff. Anyway, so that just that. In regards to the, I didn't know, and maybe just because I haven't been paying attention, but I didn't know that we became carbon neutral in 2015. So whoopee for us, that's great. But anyways, what I was gonna suggest is that, and there's also reference to our climate action plan from 2010, and it mentions a number of actions that were completed and 13 are ongoing in progress. So just a suggestion for consideration is, I think it would be nice to see in the new plan a little report on what we have actually done. So in 2010, we set out to do this. Here's the things that we set out to do, and we've done this, this, and this. These are still the things to do. So I think that's a good way to kind of segue into the new plan, and to alert, council and the community as well about, we've been doing a number of things. So I think those are good things to highlight. One thing, so a question I have is about, so the targets for greenhouse gas emissions. And I recognize that, these are a lot of them set by senior levels of government and that sort of thing. But it would be helpful for me, and I think for the community as well, to figure out how are we setting those in Sydney? And in terms of how, and this also kind of relates to having some sort of performance framework, or a way to know, have some sort of benchmarks established. Where are we at now with certain things? Here's the goal we want to get to, and here are the things that we're going to do. Now, I've read the plan, and I've read through all of the actions, And I think there's some really good things in there. But the thing that's missing for me in that little table is, it talks about here's the action we're gonna do, here's the potential costs, here's the priority, that sort of thing. But what isn't, I think would be good for me to know in council and the community is, in the scheme of things, how does that particular that initiative or that action contribute to the outcome? So what we've done is we've listed a lot of things on a to-do list. These are things that we believe will have an impact in reducing our emissions. But how does it affect that outcome? So for example, one of our things is, one of the actions is to have an adopt a tree program, which I think is a good thing to do. And so what I was thinking in this sort of more performance framework is, do we have an idea of what does our tree canopy look like now? So I don't know. So maybe 20 years ago, our tree canopy covered, I don't know, say 50% of the town. I don't know. So establish what the benchmark is that currently our tree canopy covers 20% of the town. Our goal for 2030 is whatever that is, that we want to increase our tree canopy by a specific percentage. And then, how many trees do we need to plant to have that happen, right? So that when we're going through our tree planting program, we can measure that, okay, we need to plant 100 trees every year, and we've done that. So it's just a way of measuring what we're doing. Does that make sense? It's a question suggestion, I guess.
It does make sense. I think it depends on what scope of measuring we're doing and what capacity we have in-house to achieve that, and whether certain things are measurable at all.
Yeah.
In terms of, one of the things that we had considered including here was, measuring the potential GHG impacts of any particular initiative, because it is something that other plans do in the province. The challenge is that, typically it's consultants who are hired to who have all of the sophisticated technology to be able to, measure all of these things. And even with that, those measurements that happen, a lot of them are basically very educated guesses that are difficult to measure. And so kind of the approach here was to prioritize, okay, let's actually do the actions and spend our energy doing the actions than spending our energy keeping track of what we're doing. Because if we only have so much energy to spend, I'd rather do the actions than measure that we're maybe doing them medium amount kind of thing.
I was wondering, maybe on that table when you're prioritizing things, maybe part of the prioritization could be how much bang for our buck are we getting for a particular initiative? So planting trees versus something else, so that if council is in a position where we have to limit funds for certain things, we can say, okay, probably the best thing to do is provide heat pump incentives, and that's where we're getting, so just something like that.
And that's why the approach to the plan is to say, okay, these are the biggest areas of emissions, being buildings and transportation. So let's, prioritize those in buildings and transportation, where those will have our biggest emissions reductions, and looking more at the broader area than each specific action, because it's going to be, certainly possible for us to pursue that, and we can look into that, but just in terms of prioritizing.
Right.
Yeah.
In regards to step code implementation, did you see that we would be engaging with the development community on that in terms of how we want to implement that in Sydney?
Did I see, or are we?
I should say, are we planning to do that? Is that in terms of engagement and in terms of moving forward with step code? Is that something we're planning to do?
At this stage, since step 3 is going to be automatically incorporated into the building code in December, January-ish, because it takes we're required to have a year of engagement prior to adopting higher level step codes. At this point, it's faster to just let the province incorporate building code by itself in the natural process than for us to engage for a year, which would then bring us beyond how it's going to happen. But there's still opportunities now for us to engage for steps 4 and steps 5 to incorporate or to implement those at a faster pace in the province. So that could be something that we bring forward as well as an action. And that's kind of what this was getting across to, is looking at the higher steps, steps 4 and step 5.
Okay.
But that would require engagement.
So,
There was a,
Councillor O'Keefe, I've
Yep.
got a couple of other
Okay,
speakers. Can I come
I'll,
back to you?
I'll just add, just one more, just in terms of the engagement, and I'll send the rest of you. Engagement, it would be nice if we had some opportunities for individuals to actually maybe have small discussion groups and things, to kind of discuss certain problems. I think giving people the opportunity to do that sometimes elicits more ideas and comments than just, through looking at a poster board and, having it open-ended. So I'll just leave it at that, and I'll email you my other comments. Thanks.
Mayor McNeil-Smith?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Gilmer, for a very comprehensive report. We've been keenly awaiting this report for a year or so. So thank you. I find it very readable on all levels. I think it informs that there's an excellent plan, and but it also educates us along the way, or it certainly educated me some places along the way, and brings awareness to things. Just a couple of questions, and first on the engagement, and I think the pop-ups are a great idea. Would they be advertised through social media at the time?
Yes.
Okay. Was consideration, I realize there's a cost benefit and staff resources, cost resources, but was consideration given to an open house?
I think we'd considered a couple different options. I think if we do a couple pop-ups, there might be more opportunity to reach more diverse folks by having it on 2 different days at different timings and locations, rather than one open house that might reach kind of the usual crew that shows up to things. That was kind of the intention behind that suggestion.
Okay, thank you. And it is mentioned, through the chair, it is mentioned that, we have different community engagements going on. We've recently had some active transportation. Of course, we have the large OCP engagement going on. Is the timing of this engagement through the pop-ups to commence after the OCP engagement completes on April 11th?
Yes, that is the intention. At this point, it is loosely proposed for April and May for pop-ups, just to kind of work internally for the best timing, just logistically. Those haven't been set in stone in this proposal yet.
Okay.
To try and accommodate the most as appropriately as possible.
Thank you. And just 2 other quickly. One is, how often does CRD update emissions inventory? I maybe perhaps should know that, being on CRD board, but.
So far, from my understanding, is they did it for 2020, they did it for 2018, and I think they had one similar close to previous to that. My understanding from conversation with CRD staff is that this is a regular interval project for them. Obviously, it's a choice whether or not we want to be reliant on them, but.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, it's a question I can certainly take to CRD committee. And has the idea of we talk about measurement, but we know we're a growing community slowly, through the census information. So you can have reductions, but sometimes it's helpful to have per capita information, what, the per capita changes. Is that a consideration in some of the information that'll come forward?
Yes, I thought that there was included, maybe I'm misremembering, I think our per capita emissions were about 4.6 tons per person, and we're kind of middle of the pack in terms of the CRD. And, there is consideration given to that, but it's more, what data do we want to share versus, like, how much is useful. The challenge is that, with measuring greenhouse gas emissions, a lot of the time the actual methodology behind this is taking provincial numbers and regional numbers, and then, they'll divide it up by population per region. So whether or not we see, all of our residents take bikes every day or not, that will only be shown in our GHG inventory based on regional numbers of car ownership, gas, like fuel purchase, and then, you know, they kind of infer that based on Sydney's population of 12,000. So that's kind of the tricky element.
Thank you. My last comment is just a comment. Council might recall that Mayor Ken Williams of Highlands in 2019 brought through the AVICC convention, which is the Vancouver Island Coastal Communities, a climate challenge, and asking council members to fill out their the climate scoring, if you will, about their lifestyles, and the intention was to do it again in 2020, but again, we know what interfered with that. So any thought to perhaps coming up with, just as part of community awareness education, perhaps a challenge? People, there must be some scoring or something out there that...
Certainly something that we could look into and bring forward if that's something that council is interested in.
Okay, I'll leave that as a thought. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. So I guess I have, for the engagement itself, I guess the one comment, since you hadn't chosen the locations yet, that in addition to probably downtown and the band shell, as you said, another one probably like at Tallista Park by the Art Gallery, if that was a weekend one, would probably be great and get more of the people who are not the usual suspects. Especially since it's in the location that's been identified as kind of at the highest risk. That might be an interesting thing for people who are using that area to know if they might not know it. So you might get some interesting discussions out of that. And reading the plan, I had a couple of comments. The first was where I got to the part where we have a wind-powered pump at Iroquois Park. Is that still there? Where is that?
That's my understanding. That was included in conversation with the engineering department. I'm not sure all of the details there, but I'm happy to find out if you would like to know more.
Yeah, because I thought I didn't know about it, and I go there with my kids to the water park. If we know where that is, if we could put a sign around there somewhere to brag about that, I think that would be a great thing to highlight. Another piece that jumped out at me that's kind of just like a bullet in a list, but I thought was kind of something that needed to be shifted to the foreground, was where you have, the list of what you can do for residents on page 31, talking about stormwater infiltration, and it was embracing a soggy yard. And I thought, man, that's just the best one, right? Really buried in there. Because the highest value things we can do is actually just shifting people's expectations of what is acceptable for life, infrastructure, and how nature behaves. Because otherwise we end up spending tons of money and tons of greenhouse gases and expense, getting it to the point where people think that puddles shouldn't exist even after 5 atmospheric rivers have gone through, and they're upset that there's water on the sidewalks. And kind of, if there's some way we can kind of forefront that as like Sydney's really going to review what things we can stop doing under a climate lens justification. For example, I'm thinking, we've talked about rainwater gardens before, heard from staff that it's very flat here and that's not very helpful. But one thing we can do is mow lawns less. Some of the things we've been doing is planting more trees and kind of encouraging less hardscaping. Anything that increases, transpiration will help us out there, and that would save money. And being able to say, Sydney is letting some areas be mowed less because of this, if there's anywhere we can identify, would, I think, be great. For the dog park, we had the example come up where we were considering the path to allow more accessibility into the dog park, and staff came back with kind of like a crushed surface instead of paved. And I'm wondering if there's more ways we can look at paths like that rather than paved, because that was actually an accessibility thing, was that access. And I know that we've made justifications of things like paving the new sidewalk in Tallista Park and widening it for accessibility, but if it turns out we can still achieve accessibility with a non-hard structure, I would much rather be able to see that. I know the cost-benefit analysis is higher maintenance, but there should be lower upfront costs. So kind of bringing more of that thing, kind of going for the lazy, cheap, and on autopilot is the reason all of this stuff happens, right? People drive from 2 blocks away to downtown Sydney because they're on autopilot and people are lazy and cheap, and just in general. So let's use that, you know, to benefit ourselves by making what we do subscribe to our being lazy and cheap. I'm concerned about, I liked Councillor O'Keefe's idea about kind of being able to highlight what was, in a relative way, a high impact activity versus a lower impact activity. I understood your point about, you know, these are the things we can do, so we're going to talk about what we can do and what our priority is for that and not get into that muddy water. But at the same time, I feel that might highlight something for us, for council, but also for residents reviewing the plan, that some of the things that we've identified we can do might all in fact be low impact things. That there's literally nothing that the town can do to move that needle if residents themselves don't choose to do it. And the example I'm looking at here was particularly where we found 51% of total trips within Sydney are taken by driving, when Sydney is only 4.6 kilometers of walking from end to end. It took me, I recorded this, so it would take me 53 minutes to do that, walking at my pace. Obviously not everyone can do that, but some can, which means that pretty much anywhere I picked walking to the downtown core was a 20-minute walk away. Knowing the way our density has been concentrated around the downtown core, I'm guessing the majority of our population is within a 10 to 15-minute walk of shops already, and we've said walkable neighborhoods is a thing, which is usually a 10-minute walk. And we've taken some steps in our OCP to address that by putting more commercial spaces out in the marine use area and things like that to boost that. This is good, this is complementary to this plan, but there's very little we can do if a 10 to 15-minute walk is already unachievable for people in the area that already has the most sidewalks and has the least ability to put in bike lanes. And so I think being able to really highlight that a need for the town can't actually do this all for people, and we might end up spending what is a very high amount of money, $250,000 or more, to build something when really the choice can already be made with our existing infrastructure. I don't know how to make that point, but if we can, that would be great.
Councillor Fallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And good evening, Ms. Gilmore, and welcome to your inaugural presentation to Council. To Councillor Duncan's point regarding, I think it's a very valid point about how small Sydney is and how accessible I'm speaking of distance, how easy it is to get from one area to the other. I think the rising cost of gasoline might start having people think twice. So a couple of things that stepped out on this whole thing for me is the importance of trees. And in your report, you also talked about looking at ways for residents to deal with the rainfall, the sudden rainfall, and of course what happens with the change in the style of rainfall that it's coming down suddenly. So what we need are trees, because trees are going to slow down the water coming down to the ground. The water that does come down to the ground is going to get used up by the root system. So I think it's really important that we seriously look at maintaining what we have and increasing from that point. In the urban forestry strategy, it talked about engaging with our First Nations to look at trees in Sydney and to Councillor Garnett's point about some reference to the First Nations in the report, I think that's something that we can link in as well, because trees seem to be a really big thing. That's also passive shading. And so to that point is the heavy reliance on hydros also something that spoke to me. So we need to ensure that we also have passive ways of shading and cooling our homes, not just relying on mechanical methods. I think going into the step code and making sure that our buildings address climate change is really important. We also need to ensure that we are looking at what can we do in the design of the property, not just the building itself, but the design of the property, as in how the building is aligned, the amount of vegetation. It becomes really, really important. And I think I'm going to leave my comments there because a lot of the other stuff has been covered, but great report and thank you very much.
Okay. There is a recommendation in the report that needs a motion. Is there any other, Mayor McNeil-Smith?
I would move the staff recommendations that staff be directed to proceed with the engagement activities outlined in option 1 and report back to council with a summary of public feedback and a final draft of the climate action plan. That's 1. 2, that this report be referred to the APC.
Second.
For review and comment.
Okay, that's moved and seconded. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thanks very much. So I note it's 20 to 9. Our next item is the long-awaited tax distribution policy. And I'm, I guess, looking to committee for your pleasure on this. It seems like it's going to be a lengthy presentation. It is possible that Mr. Hissick could do part of it and that we could discuss later.
I'd like to move that item 8B be moved to future committee of the whole agenda.
Second.
So that's moved and seconded. Could I recommend that it be an item early on the agenda rather than towards the end? Just so we avoid this happening again. Mayor McNeil.
Yeah, if I could make perhaps a friendly amendment that it go to a future meeting. I don't know, there might be a council meeting that has a lower amount of business.
That's fine, yeah, I agree.
Okay, if that's acceptable to the mover and seconder, seeing no objection, okay. Oh, sorry, Councillor Garnett? Councillor Fowler.
Thank you. I was just going to say I would like a 5-minute break and plow on through.
Okay. Councillor Garnett?
Oh,
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually agreeing with Councillor Fowler, and if I could ask a question through you to staff. Timing for if I'm not saying the decision is going to go that way, but if the decision went the way that you would need it to be this year's tax, if it went that way, in terms of timing, should we be delaying this?
Thank you, Councillor. If we deferred this to April 4th, it would still be done in time for me to do what I need to do. But I'm more than prepared to finish it tonight if that's Council's wish.
My preference would be to plow through it because the poor gentleman's had to sit here all night anyways waiting to give his presentation. I'd like to see him do it.
So,
thank you.
What I'd like to do is call the question on the motion, which will either defer it or not. And if it doesn't get deferred, then I'm going to call the 5-minute break and then we'll come back. So,
as the mover, I'd like to speak, if I could, just to motivate, since we've had the chance. We received the PowerPoint presentation late this afternoon. There's 40 slides in the PowerPoint. We're not going to do justice to what is a difficult concept. I think we've gone through this about a year and a half ago. It was a long presentation. There's no indication from the PowerPoint that it'll be different tonight. So I would suggest, in the interest of having focused committee or council address this, that we move it to a future agenda. Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. I would just plead with my colleagues that I think, this is something that's really important. I think it deserves a good amount of time and fresh minds to look at it. So I really hope that we can defer this to the next meeting so we can come at it fresh and have had the opportunity to review the slides and make some good decisions. Thanks.
Okay. So I'd like to call the question. I don't want to use the whole meeting debating whether we should defer this. I just wanted to ask. Go ahead. Yep.
I guess to the best of staff's ability, what I'm worried about deferring this, because we've done this before, we've deferred something and then we had to defer it a couple of times because we ran out of time in the next meetings, is I'm worried about doing that again. So I don't know if staff has an idea of our upcoming meeting loads and if whether just simply moving this earlier on the agenda would help address that. Or if we have big items coming up later too.
Yeah, I know the next council meeting is, it's not a huge agenda, and I'm not aware of anything significant at the next committee of the whole in April.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll call the question on the motion to defer to a future meeting. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, that's 5 in favor, 2 opposed. So it's deferred.
Move adjournment.
So that's a motion to adjourn, seconded by Mayor McNeil Smith. Call the question, all in favor? Opposed? We're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.